So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this year's Palmer Lectureship. We have several speakers to introduce our visiting professor, Professor Insoo Suh, but I'll start with the land acknowledgement if I could. As we gather today to connect for the work of the University of Toronto, we acknowledge this land, the people, and all other beings, animate and inanimate, today as well as the ancestors. This area has been the place of communities coming together for well over 15,000 years. This land has been the territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Petun Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit Nation. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and Allied Nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work in community. We are also mindful of the broken covenants and the need to strive to make right with all our relations, sharing stories and telling the truth of this place. So why don't we proceed to Tim Jackson. We'll do the introduction of the Palmer Lecture.
That's right. Thank you so much, Orion. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2026 Palmer Lecture. So we're here this morning for the Palmer Lecture, and Dr. John Palmer was a very distinguished member of the Faculty of Surgery at U of T, and what I wanted to do is just say a few words to allow us to remember him and tell you a little bit about Dr. Palmer. John Angus Palmer was born in Meaford, Ontario in 1925. He attended medical school at the University of Toronto and then completed the Galley course in both general surgery and plastic surgery here in Toronto. After he completed his residency, he went on to be awarded the prestigious Newfield Scholarship, which supported training in reconstructive surgery at the University of Edinburgh. He then went on to do additional colorectal training at St. Mark's, and then returned back to Toronto to become a surgical oncologist, one of the original sort of surgical oncologists that we would recognize today. So John Palmer developed interest and expertise in a very broad range of general surgery. This included head and neck surgery, head and neck reconstruction, thyroid, parathyroid, and expertise in GI malignancy. He published several pivotal papers, including some landmark papers on radiation-induced injuries to the GI tract, as well as primary hyperparathyroidism. So it is very fitting that our visiting professor today is in fact an endocrine surgeon. So in good company with Dr. Palmer. Dr. Palmer was known to be a master surgeon, an astounding technician, a thoughtful clinician, and a gifted teacher. John had numerous interests outside of surgery, including his family, painting, and you can see some examples of his really quite impressive artwork here on the slide, including other things like antiquing, classic cars, carving decoys, teaching anatomy, skiing, boating, and he also loved sports and was in fact one of the team doctors for the Toronto Argonauts football team. I'm told that John lived a balanced life in an era where being a workaholic was the norm for surgeons. This is a topic very relevant to today. And so in this, in many ways, Dr. Palmer was ahead of his time. Unfortunately, Dr. Palmer died prematurely in 1984. This lectureship was established by the friends, family, and former students of Dr. Palmer and medical colleagues in 1985, as a tribute to his life and his memory. So with that, I want to ask Dr. Madani to come and introduce this year's lecturer.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. I have the honor of introducing our Palmer lecturer. I've known Dr. Suh now for Dr. Suh for a number of years. He's a professor of endocrine surgery at New York University, NYU Grossman School of Medicine, and NYU Langone Health. He serves there as the vice chair of surgical innovation. He's also the director of their endocrine surgery fellowship program and also the director of the minimally invasive endocrine surgery. He's also chief of endocrine surgery at NYC Health Hospital's Bellevue in New York. He did his undergraduate degree at Yale And then after that, he went to California and did everything else there, including med school residency, fellowship, and he worked at staff there as well. He also did the very famous Stanford Biodesign Innovation Program as a fellow as well. He's an internationally recognized expert in endocrine surgical diseases and thyroid, parathyroid, adrenals. His clinical and research portfolio includes specifically applications of minimally invasive techniques. He's actually one of the pioneers in scarless thyroidectomy, so the transoral endoscopic techniques. And he's really one of the recognized leaders in North America for this. He's authored over 100 peer-reviewed publications, serves on the editorial board for several peer-reviewed journals, and he's really an active member of several of our national societies. One of his claim to fame is really his work in innovation and entrepreneurship. So to that effect, he's also an inventor of many medtech innovations, and he's a proponent of academic entrepreneurship. He's got several patent applications to his name, multiple grants, and startup companies to research and do a lot of R&D in medtech. He leads the surgical innovation program in NYU in the Department of Surgery, which trains the next generation of clinicians in medtech innovation. And he also serves as a clinical lead for NYU's Office of Technology Opportunities and Ventures. So we are really honored to have you here. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Suh.
Well, that was quite a mouthful. Thank you so much, Dr. Madani, good friend, known you for quite a while. Thank you for the hospitality from the University of Toronto staff, particularly last night. It's so great to reconnect with all of my endocrine friends as well as new friends and leadership. What a world-class city and a world-class institution. I hear that some ranking systems recently had borne that out. So congratulations to all of you. This is not really a talk about endocrine surgery, and I will put that in my disclosures here. This is my only real disclosure at the moment, Corset Therapeutics, which is unrelated to the topic of my talk. I do spend most of my time in endocrine surgery, and I won't be talking about it today. So if you want to talk about, taking out thyroids through the mouth or normal calcemic hyperparathyroidism, which is literally my least favorite topic, but you want to talk about it, then please come see me afterwards. Lastly, innovation, as we all know, is a little bit of an overused term, and it can be applied to so many things. So I'm going to try to be fairly laser focused in the way that I use that word. It's really just pertaining to the development of newer medical technologies. I don't know all the answers. This is a talk that I had fun putting together because it poses questions as well. So I welcome the discussion. But maybe I'll start with one. What makes what we would call a surgeon innovator? Depending on what image pops into your mind, this may be an easy or difficult answer. You could use ChatGPT like I did for an image, and you could see here it's not particularly helpful. It looks actually fairly horrifying what that lab looks like. But for me, it's not too straightforward to define it with words. But I think I can define it better by recalling a few people as pretty clear examples. I'm not going to go into the amazing innovators I've already had dinner with last night. People who've invented EBIS and learned how to keep transplanted lungs alive for a long time ex vivo, and people who are revolutionizing surgical AI and education. But let's go back into history. So maybe example number one, Theodore Coker, one of the most influential surgeons in modern history, and a nice one to pick for me as an endocrine surgeon. Coker lived, as we all know, sort of in the mid-1800s, died in early 1900s, is considered a pioneer of modern surgery with many eponymous instruments, surgical maneuvers, techniques named after him. He revolutionized the practice of surgery by emphasizing meticulous, bloodless dissection techniques under strict aseptic protocols that were heavily influenced at the time by people like Lister. These concepts lent themselves perfectly to thyroidectomy, which at the time when his teacher Bill Roth, another famous name, was performing them, was associated with a near 50% mortality rate in the operating room. Coker brought that down to basically zero. And so for these accomplishments as well as others related to thyroid surgery, he was the first surgeon to win the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1909. So really a true paradigm-shifting master clinical surgeon. How about example number two, Judith Volkmann? Many of you may know him. A legendary pediatric surgeon. It's lovely that we're here in Sick Kids to honor him on some level. Scientists considered the father of angiogenesis. He was the youngest surgeon in chief at Boston Children's Hospital at the age of 35, and is controversial at the time, but groundbreaking research on the concept of tumor angiogenesis led directly to the development of drugs like Avastin, which at the time of his untimely death in 2008 was already treating over 1.2 million people for cancers, macular degeneration, probably the biggest impact in that field, and other diseases. So incredible scientific innovator. Or how about Tom Fogarty, who parenthetically I would like to in part dedicate this talk to. I had the pleasure of knowing him a bit. He recently passed away 3 months ago. Fogarty was a cardiovascular surgeon, a serial inventor and entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist. His eponymous balloon embolectomy catheter, we all know this, was first patented in 1969, continues to be used today in over 300,000 procedures yearly. Fogarty was a true entrepreneur. He founded over 45 medical technology companies and also established a nonprofit called the Fogarty Institute for Innovation, which educates and supports healthcare innovation in the entrepreneurial sector. Among his highest honors was being awarded the Presidential National Medal of Technology and Innovation by Barack Obama in 2014. Now, all three of these people here are in different ways exemplars of surgical innovation along different paths. So then, the question for me is, how did they each develop and incubate those skills or talents earlier on in their training to create the conditions for success for each of them? Well, Coker followed a path that was pretty standard at the time for European academic physicians. He was a Swiss national, did amazingly well in medical school at the University of Bern, and then toured Europe's leading medical centers to learn from the masters of the day, including the folks that I mentioned before. He then returned to his home institution with the lessons he had learned and the problems that he observed deeply, and dedicated his career to solve those problems, particularly in the perfection of surgical technique and the craft, based on the newest discoveries and tools of his day. Folkman was equally as brilliant. He had grown up in Ohio, started college at the Ohio State University at 15 years old, where he studied under Robert Zollinger, another big name. These experiences helped land him at Harvard for medical school at the age of 19, where he began working in the basic science research lab of Robert Gross, who was then the surgeon-in-chief of Boston Children's. And so then his already insatiable academic curiosity met basic science resources, and then the rest is, as they say, history. He completed residency in Mass General in 1967, and 2 years later became the surgeon-in-chief at Boston Children's. So for those residents in the audience, this is the goal for each of you. Now, Fogarty was a different story for many reasons. He had lost his father young in life. He had also grown up in Ohio, and then he grew up a bit of a troublemaker as a kid. He initially started his young adult life in a variety of odd jobs and careers, most notably as, believe it or not, a semi-professional boxer. He had actually fought in 40 matches, and in the 40th one, he got beat up so badly and got his nose broken that he decided that he should probably try to find another line of work. But he was always a bit of a tinkerer, even as a child, and loved to invent new things. In fact, there is a certain type of clutch mechanism that still bears his inventorship for motor scooters. He didn't really have the chance to build upon that much without the time, money, resources, or people to help him. One of the odd jobs that he took was as an OR scrub tech. And that was when he found Jack Cranley, a prominent local vascular surgeon who became his lifelong mentor and supporter. He convinced him to go to medical school and become a surgeon, and he supported Fogarty's love of tinkering. Fogarty invented the embolectomy balloon catheter in his garage during his residency and wound up testing it in a human patient under Cranley's supervision. This was a little while ago, before the days of IRBs and things like that. But I'm sure it was done ethically. The dramatic effectiveness of the catheter led him to patent and selling its rights to Edwards Life Sciences, which still makes the original catheter today. Amazing stories from all three of these people in their own right. We had a master clinician, trained in the best known ways possible at the time, and in some ways set up for success in this context to become the master clinician. We had a brilliant mind who performed brilliantly in higher education, met some incredible mentors who opened up the lab to him and opened the doors to becoming a preeminent surgeon scientist. That's Folkman. And then we had this maverick boxer tinker guy who was inspired by a singular mentored relationship to invent and engineer brand new surgical technologies. And based on that, success would invent many more things and also parenthetically buy a vineyard in the process. So we have master clinician, surgeon, scientist, and medtech inventor, entrepreneur. If we look at modern surgical training today, which of these phenotypes is inherently supported? I would argue that surgical training is really all about making us all master clinicians, right? And we have a rich tradition and infrastructure already to build a research career if one so desires, not just in the basic science lab now, but in things like health services and medical surgical education. But there are no real universally accepted pathways, programs, or infrastructure associated with going a little bit more off the beaten path toward a life of invention, engineering, and entrepreneurship. So why is that? There are a lot of barriers. This is a little bit of opinionating right now from myself, both structural and personal. First, there's the barrier related to opportunity cost and time. Medical and surgical training is costly. I do apologize, this is a little bit from the US bias. It's already packed with content and is increasingly limited in real-time length. The infrastructure and incentive structures are clearly less clearly defined and robust. And there are already many other pathways that are more established and need people to join, whether they're more clinical surgeons, biomedical and health services researchers, master educators. So let's go into a little bit of detail about the financials related to a career in medicine. The reality is that it's a real burden, at least in the US. You can see here, the median cost of a 4-year medical school in the US is $300,000 to $400,000. And the majority of US graduates graduate with a median debt of over $200,000. The figure on the right from the AAMC shows that over time, the increased cost of living in medical graduates has outpaced inflation and exacerbates the entire problem. And the downstream effects are well documented. The amount of debt has been shown to affect the medical student's choice of what they go into, rather than what they're passionate about or what they think they'd be good at. Financial stress and toxicity is clearly associated with burnout, and the heavy weight of debt leads naturally to a greater risk aversion in career decisions, especially earlier in their careers. In addition, med schools are facing pressures too, and are experimenting with shortened pathways to get graduates out into the workforce more quickly. CAMP here, this is their website, is a consortium of currently 34 medical schools in North America and counting that have instituted or in the process of instituting accelerated 3-year curriculum pathways led by institutions such as my own at NYU. There are potentially many purported benefits. One can argue about those. But what is definitely true by design is that this provides even less supported time for students to explore different career options in a subsidized manner, embark on research projects or other endeavors. Why don't we talk a little bit more about incentive structures, particularly at academic institutions. In 2021, a group of prominent scientists and researchers wrote a position paper in Science highlighting the limitations of the current state of affairs with promotion and tenure procedures at most universities. And they said in part, academic promotion and tenure processes that typically prioritize faculty grants and publications can fail to fully assess and value entrepreneurial, innovative endeavors that can produce the kind of societal impacts that universities are increasingly being called on to provide, and that many faculty and students increasingly prioritize. So let's say if you launched a company based on your academic expertise and created a product that benefits society in countless ways, but didn't necessarily get to be PI on a NIH R01 grant or equivalent here in Toronto or publish 400 papers, you may not get equal footing in that promotion and tenure process. There's also the barrier related to expertise. Although most medical schools and institutions are based within a larger university structure with other graduate and professional schools, med schools themselves don't typically have internal inherent resources in the types of things that you need for med tech, such as engineering, law, regulatory expertise, and business. So any efforts in the innovation realm rely on external partnerships inherently. And even if you have a large university with multiple professional schools, most have largely siloed infrastructures with only a few clearly defined and limited cross-disciplinary programs. And lastly, we must acknowledge that there is at least some extent, some factors related to the culture of medicine and the mindset of many of those who choose it. There's definitely a positive effect that medicine as a career has had in that it is predictable, it's stable, and if one built the assumption of stability in a medical or surgical career, to choose a path in innovation which can be associated with riskier odds, then the stable path may be a little bit harder to depart from. if the best percentages of venture capital funded startups have only a 5% chance of succeeding, those are real world numbers, that is by definition a riskier endeavor, right? So as we know, the prototypical stable and predictable path has many pros to it. It's so incredibly efficient in its ability right now, even now, to transmit knowledge and expertise down to the next generation. It's stepwise, it's serially oriented, and there are clear roles and identities that are anchoring for people. But by its very nature, I think I would contend that this very stable path supports and inculcates a bit of a narrower or limited mental worldview. This is the only way to do it, bias. The system is static, and my place within it as a cog is very clear and must be respected. Rocking the boat, particularly with leadership or administration, may not be received very well. These are all biases that can tend to grow over time in stable and predictable settings and mindsets. And lastly, there is definitely some degree of industry or industry adjacent activities being a little bit, shall we say, tainted or ethically compromised with current management of conflicts of interest within the academic setting, still very highly imperfect processes. So let's do a little bit of a dive into this cultural bias our profession tends to have regarding involvement with, quote, the industry. It didn't really used to be like this, at least not as much. Historically, the pharma and medtech industries were regarded at least a little bit more positively and as partners in an aligned goal to improve health and cure disease. But during the 90s and 2000s, there were several practices and highly publicized incidents that shed light on some improper or at minimum controversial practices on the interface of industry and medicine, and sparked a massive sea change. The first had to do with scandals related to undue company influence on clinical studies and publications, which came in several forms through ghostwriting allegations, suppression or non-publication of negative results, and other forms of shadow publication control by companies. Among the more infamous examples was the story of rofecoxib, or Vioxx, which was marketed by Merck. In one of their major trials, the company and investigators omitted 3 MIs from safety analysis, which underemphasized and selectively framed the cardiovascular risk associated with this class of med, and would later come to light after regulatory approval, after post-marketing, after a lot of patients had been exposed to that medicine. In addition, 16 of the 20 clinical papers that were written at the time about that drug were found ultimately to have been ghostwritten, at least in draft form, by employees of Merck and not the actual authors listed. Ultimately, this resulted in over 13,000 lawsuits against Merck and an eventual payout by the company of almost $5 billion in settlement. Secondly, as many of us have lived through, because the relative looseness in marketing policies, the industry had felt freer and freer over time to pursue ever more aggressive and permeating marketing strategies to physicians, which came either in the form of swag, like these pens that we all had access to expensive dinners, to even paid trips to exotic locations. And third, financial conflict of interest when it comes to clinical research came to light following a highly publicized death of an altruistic trial subject named Jesse Gelsinger in 1999. He died during an experimental gene therapy trial being held at the University of Pennsylvania. And in the subsequent investigation, and among several other problems that were identified, it was found that the PI had held significant shares in a biotech company that stood to gain, at least in part financially, from the trial itself. Now, there is much more nuance to this, and Penn certainly had its side of the story at the time, but the public pressure was to be punitive and to start regulating. So what were some of those changes? In the US, on the federal level, the Physician Payment Sunshine Act was passed, which introduced the open payment system that is a publicly viewable database on how much physicians are paid by industry involvement. The Institute of Medicine came out with a large series of statements and recommendations for academic medical systems regarding changes on how to manage COI, led to the formation of a massive regulatory and compliance framework that exists in every university to this day. And then on a positive note, clinicaltrials.gov was founded to ensure that all prospective trials were registered from the beginning and were searchable. So at least in theory, the negative studies could be identified even if they were not published in the New England Journal or Lancet. The cultural response within our world, which was likely unintended, was to frame the industry as worse or bad actors needing to be managed and not as much as partners anymore. NYU has an entire COI compliance framework. I'm sure Toronto does too. There's a shift in mainstream thought about industry collaboration, whether through consulting relationships, lunches for noon conferences. Typically, we're being for the benefit of medical students or residents, or sponsored research from going from a routine thing to more risky and ethically fraught. And it created a spillover chilling effect on people's desires to pursue activities related to newer commercially relevant innovation and entrepreneurship. So that was a lot. So with all of these headwinds, what is the point? Why do I still think that we should support and teach med tech innovation, or at least provide the opportunities for those interested to learn this? Well, surgeons are naturally predisposed to innovate based on the nature of what we do. I don't think I need to tell this audience that. Many of us are born tinkerers, and we're oriented toward physical solutions by being in the operating room. But this strength extends not just in the invention of new technologies, but also in the strategic direction that new technology should follow with clinical testing, evidence generation, and adoption. This is a very interesting study from 2017 from Stanford's Graduate School of Business, their business school, where the authors evaluated 231 med tech startups that had received VC funding, basically real viable funded companies. They looked at the makeup of the company's people, and they found that the most successful startups, as they defined as the fastest time toward regulatory approval of a commercial medical product, was heavily dependent on direct MD involvement. Typically surgeons, either in the invention product development team or on the company's board of directors. They found that there was a positive correlation between the proportion of inventing surgeons on the team and the success of the product, with optimal performance peaking when surgeons made up about 40% of that team. Now, just to be fair, they also found that any more than that proportion, and they found that the companies perform worse. The theory being that too much of one thing tended to lead to a little bit of groupthink. Think about maybe your more unproductive M&M conferences or something. Also, not that I mean to shoot myself in the foot, surgeons and other MDs as CEOs were associated with worse company performance, although I do have some thoughts on that one. But anyway, surgeons are predisposed to innovate. Second, technology can be a force multiplier for good. Another cruder way of putting this concept is that some people use this adage: a single surgeon may treat a total of thousands of patients by the end of their career, but someone who has developed a new technology could potentially affect millions. And regardless of whether you have the bug in you personally to invent something and take it to market and eventually to patients, there is a much larger world, a much larger ecosystem in healthcare around us, with new technologies that are being developed every day, mostly in the context of forces that are beyond our direct control because we simply don't understand it enough. This includes companies, the industry, the investors, the regulatory agencies, intellectual property gatekeepers, market access and reimbursement institutions, governmental largely. I believe that we all should have some familiarity in this so that we can retain some influence in it. This is the only way we can be simultaneously stewards of innovation, and those rather than those that are simply swept around by trends we don't particularly understand. And for those of you who are interested, the opportunities are vast and varied. If you break down the valuations of companies in the healthcare technology sector roughly into digital health, software, AI, classic med tech, referring to devices, and then biotech and pharma, the market sizes of these opportunities are each extremely large, totaled nearly $2 trillion in 2023 alone. That's, sorry for the small writing, but that's where the red box is outlined there. And in 2022 alone, these were the number and type of startups regarded as being unicorns, or defined as privately held companies valued at least $1 billion each. This is simply to send the message that there is thankfully always a healthy appetite in our imperfect, privately financed world for the opportunity for great medical technology ideas. And again, for those of you who are interested in these activities and remain in the academic setting, if we go back to that promotion and tenure recommendation article I mentioned earlier, one of the highlight recommendations is the need for academic institutions to change their advancement criteria to include innovation and entrepreneurship related activities, including the number of patents that are generated, other IP, sponsored research, startup creation, and otherwise engagement or education within this community. This is the last bit of editorialization for the next 2 minutes. The reality check we must have also is that, especially for the younger ones in our audience, is that medicine and surgery as a career is not necessarily as, quote, safe or frankly as rewarding as it used to be. Our autonomy continues to be chipped away in many ways. Our financial compensation relative to inflation and cost of living is not what it used to be. Our current models seem to be leading to increasing burnout and career dissatisfaction. And lastly, technology, whether we like it or not, is bound to continue to affect and likely threaten aspects of the future of our practices. So why not then be open to alternative pathways of utilizing our expertise and possibly shaping the future in a slightly different way from the average? So I hope I convinced you on some level that this may be a valid way to go. So then how then should we approach education in medtech innovation, and what would constitute a curriculum in this? For one, no matter what health-related technology one wants to pursue, whether it be in software, AI, medical devices, diagnostic tools, or even drugs, there are some basic structural topics that all new technologies need to navigate, and they form the building blocks for an educational curriculum in innovation. I've listed some of the major blocks here, from IP, which I'll touch on in a second, to the regulatory regime and environment, methods for reimbursement, the market, including sizes, including the epidemiology of disease, competitor landscape, et cetera, design engineering principles and prototyping practices, and the fundamentals of building a financial and operating plan, and ultimately a pitch for investment, which is ultimately not too far away from building up a budget proposal for a grant application. Note here that this is obviously not to say that one needs graduate degrees in all of the things, engineering, medicine, law, and business. But my contention is that the greater a basic working knowledge, big picture view of these concepts that one has, the much higher the chances that a new tech project starts off on the right foot, because all of the success should start at the very beginning. Starting off on the wrong foot is really hard to recover from. I won't go over all of those individual concepts one by one, but just to give an example, IP issues are enormously complex. And it's a field unto itself, with many subtopics, from the types of IP, which not only include patents, but you may have heard of copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets, the governmental bodies, both domestically and internationally, that issue and manage IP, what constitutes the concept of patentability of an invention versus a concept that many of you may be a little beyond this talk, called its freedom to operate. Lastly, what is the difference between being an inventor, an owner, and then being a licensee of IP? All of those things are nuanced and very important to know. I'm going to take a little trivia journey. Let's harken back to our three historical folks here for question. Anybody know which of these three invented the pacemaker? Any guesses? I'll take one guess. Someone just shout it out. Fogarty. Yeah, one would assume it was Fogarty. He was the cardiac guy of all things. He was an inventing machine. It was actually Folkman. He managed to find some spare time in his ridiculously accelerated career. In med school, he co-invented, along with a colleague from MIT, the world's first pacemaker, and was able to show proof of concept by implanting a prototype in a large animal model. What was the problem with that? He failed to convince Harvard to file a patent application to protect this technology, which admittedly was a little bit out of his own control. But then he did not file a patent application himself, which he was completely entitled to do. So who knows what the path of history would have taken if he did file that patent. Folkman's early years of angiogenesis research was challenging. He couldn't find funding. His hypothesis was way too preposterous and highly controversial at the time. Now, obviously, he wound up doing very well for himself anyway, but if he had had just a conversation with his contemporary, Fogarty, at the time, or perhaps was provided some education in the building blocks of innovation, he would have been able to maybe self-fund all of his subsequent angiogenesis research from the royalties from his pacemaker patent. By the way, I'm not saying that the lesson here is that every surgeon who has a self-described brilliant idea march into your university tech transfer office tomorrow and insist that they patent your thing. Unless you are Judith Folkman. There are a few of you out there. But that is a common mistake that the average clinician has, and leads to frustration on both sides. But rather, this means that with a little more training, we can do better. This is an interesting paper published in the Annals of Surgery in 2022, where the authors examined the trends of surgery-related patents filed over 2 decades. You can see here that especially after 2008, there was a steep increase in the number of patents filed. But if you look at the authorship of these patents, this line demonstrates the proportion of the surgical patents that where a surgeon was a co-inventor. This is not the x-axis line, but it does come pretty close. In all, only 3% of surgical patents had a surgeon on them. Considering the other data that I presented about the subsequent success of product development and approvals with surgeons as inventors, it appears to me that our involvement in the initial IP generation process is not only beneficial, but perhaps even essential to success. So then we've covered some of the structural building blocks, but for those dedicated to this path, those building blocks are only useful assuming that you have an idea to pursue. So is there a way, a process, best practices when it comes to finding that light bulb moment? My contention is yes. There are at this point a number of great innovation training programs out there, but I will highlight the Stanford Biodesign program, of which I'm an alum and I'm biased toward, and which is often regarded as the granddaddy of innovation programs that really pushed into our mainstream the concept that innovation can be learned and taught in a systematic curricular fashion in a postgraduate fellowship structure, obviously incorporating all of those building blocks along the way. This program takes on fellows who are physicians, engineers, and people with experience in the medtech industry or other businesses to work in cross-disciplinary teams in what I will refer to in a bit as the biodesign process. This program was formally founded in 2000, although its beginning roots were in the late 90s, and experienced exponential growth starting in the late 2000s to mid-2010s. Its track record is impressive. About 300 fellows trained, not including students and executive program and faculty graduates. 2/3 of them subsequently filed new technology patents, and half had published in peer-reviewed literature related to innovative new technologies or the innovation process more broadly. Importantly, over 60 startup companies were formed directly out of biodesign training, and over 90 were formed by alumni subsequent to the fellowship. They've obtained in aggregate over $1 billion in private financing, and whose products in aggregate have reached nearly 20 million patients at this point. The core to what makes this program successful and has inspired similar programs throughout the world is not simply because it teaches IP or regulation well, it does do that. But more importantly, the biodesign process that they market is a strict and systematic method of identifying and meticulously validating the correct unmet clinical need first, followed by a strict and systematic method of inventing solutions to those needs, and then building an initial strategic and business plan around the best projects that came out of that process. To give this process enough room to breathe, typically a year at minimum is necessary, and most training programs follow a roughly year-long model. Importantly, this process is agnostic to the clinical specialty, field, technology, etc. And in many cases, it encourages people like surgeons to explore areas outside of their own in order to look at other fields with fresher eyes and without the ingrained biases that expertise tends to do. And step by step along the way, one learns about those building blocks at the right times. This method's heavily influenced by design thinking principles as developed by design schools and major firms like IDEO, with concepts like user-centered design, really understanding all the problem from all sides of a clinical need before inventing anything. The idea of rapid iterative design, generating lots and lots of ideas initially with no judgment, and then inventing, prototyping, testing fast, and failing fast, leading to a much more iterative, stress-tested solution. So now that I've laid a little bit of that conceptual groundwork, I'm going to take a detour again. I'm going to present myself to you as a case study and take you through my journey of innovation and how I've biodesigned my own career. My rough timeline is as follows. I flew here from New York, absolutely love my adopted town. I love Toronto too, but I am a Californian through and through, grew up in LA, go Dodgers, I'm sorry. Started in my adult life in San Francisco in 1999, where I went to medical school at UCSF, transitioned into surgery residency there. There I met my lifelong mentors, and career interest in endocrine surgery was offered an opportunity to stay as faculty, and I turned it down, much to the chagrin of everyone in my life. You see, Stanford was just down the street, and one of my residency upperclassmen just came back from a fellowship from this program called biodesign, and just blew us all away with the things that he did compared to my own fine research work. He invented an improved variation of an epidural catheter insertion system and formed a startup to further its development. Being a tinkerer myself, I was hooked. I risked it all. I had no engineering background. I applied and thankfully was accepted, did the one-year fellowship, formed a startup, and then spent the next 3 years in the medtech industry with stints at accelerators and incubators such as Stardex and that Fogarty Institute I mentioned before. That fundamentally changed and reshaped the way that I looked at medical advancements and my role in it. But my first love was always surgery. And from the bat, even with my co-founders, it was very clear to everyone that I needed to go back at some point. I was originally scheduled to spend just a year starting up the startup, and instead, because that was totally unrealistic, added an extra 2. We needed all hands on deck. Regardless, my time was due, and to my great fortune, my chair had gotten over her anger with me for turning down her job originally, gave me a faculty position just a few years late. I spent 7 years building an endocrine surgery career, and also with a foot in innovation. More on that in a second. And then in 2021, I had the great fortune of being recruited to NYU, where I am today. To hop back a second to my time in startup land, this was my full-time job for a while. And I think it's worth going into. This was a company called Prescient Surgical, and we founded it based off an idea and project developed out of Biodesign. We developed a novel expanding and irrigating wound protector system for the prevention of SSI. This is a venture-backed company. We raised a total of $18 million in financing. The last was a Series B round led by Baxter Ventures. And we achieved commercial stage selling real devices to real hospitals after an incredibly difficult FDA clearance process. Any founder or co-founder of a startup will tell you that in the beginning, it really doesn't matter what titles you hold because everyone needs to do everything all the time. But I had 2 other co-founders with me, both engineers to this day, my lifelong friends. We had great complementary skill sets. So I was the obvious choice to lead the clinical and scientific strategy in the beginning, first as a direct employee, then with milestones achieved in my surgical career, sort of taking precedence to a number of board and consultant level positions. So what did I learn? I learned way too many things I can count here, but in my roles, I learned so much about how engineers think, how to work with them to invent the best thing, how to pitch to investors and get money from them, how to put together the basics of startup formation, develop a dynamic clinical and regulatory strategy process with room to pivot when everyone says that's an awful idea, generating clinical evidence, obtaining non-dilutive grant funding. In our case, we got an SBIR grant from the National Science Foundation, and how to partner with academic institutions on the other side of that fence. I'll be very much indebted to this time of my life and my career and have too many people to thank for shaping me in that role. Now, a few words about UCSF. I did need to prioritize redeveloping clinical and academic expertise in endocrine surgery because it's definitely not like riding a bike. I was rough. I did thankfully have Jesse Pasternak as my first fellow, fortunately. He just made me look good, which I'm so thankful for. But I was still active in Prescient Surgical and the whole network and cottage industry and medtech innovation, and I still had that itch to participate. Luckily, I was in the right place at the right time as UCSF was starting to notice what Stanford was doing. So I had a part in all of the innovation activities from the UCSF side, both from the Department of Surgery as well as the institution. Now, the pandemic hit, and then I started languishing a bit. Quite honestly, we had discussed this at dinner last night. San Francisco locked down very, very harshly. So we were not in a position where I was doing a lot, to be totally honest. And thankfully, the siren song from NYU was just sort of came during the pandemic. I moved my family with a few months' notice on New Year's Day in 2021. And the siren song call was too irresistible. They were certainly in need for an endocrine surgeon, but the new chair, Bob Montgomery, is quite the maverick and surgical innovator himself. He's a world famous transplant surgeon who is in the news basically every day these days as it relates to pig xenotransplantation. He was less interested, honestly, in how many endocrine cases I could accomplish, and he was more interested in my startup life. He asked me to join his department and help transform its culture to embrace risk and innovation through the creation of a new program. The structure of which he basically gave me free rein to play around with. So that was too good an offer and I took it. So my last few slides will describe what I've done in the few years of building our surgical innovation program at NYU. Since I was given the privilege and terror of defining a brand new program however way I wanted to, I actually went back to my own biodesign principles, if you will, of trying to understand the unmet innovation needs in our own department and our institution as a whole. I met with a lot of people, both within NYU and in the NYC medtech ecosystem more broadly, understanding what our existing strengths are regionally, as well as what our gaps were, really trying to understand what our place in the region and more broadly should be. So after a period of research and ethnography, Bob and I jointly created this threefold mission statement, which I won't read a word for word. To paraphrase, comes down to our desire to establish NYU as a true destination in New York City that supports the invention and development of new technologies, acts as a regional network hub that supports these activities regionally and educates the process to the next generation of surgeons. So in the 3.5 to 4 years of its existence, we've grown our program in several ways, from having dedicated lecture series and spots in our resident curriculum, offering improved mentorship and guidance pathways for faculty and trainees, creating collaborations with the industry on joint training programs and innovation projects, and most importantly, what we call our MedTech pipeline, which we created 2 years ago as a year-long biodesign training program open to all members of the first surgical community, then the NYU Langone Health clinical community at large. One of the major inspirations for the pipeline, other than its inspiration from biodesign, was a collaboration that I had developed with one of our own vascular surgeons named Karan Garg. He had expertise and a particular insight related to DVT treatment interventionally and approached me to help him realize this a little bit further. Now, this was early on in my NYU faculty appointment. And while I was getting the lay of the land, I had asked Bob, my chair, if there was anything I should be doing, like in my first few months in this surgical innovation vice chair role. His response was, there aren't too many of you around here, so just look there and look pretty, and people will probably just walk up to you. So that's sort of what I did, and that's what happened with Karan. Fast forward 4 years later, and along with our other partner, Jamie Schlachter, we biodesigned this need through a process. We created a workable pitch and business plan, obtained pilot funding, filed a patent application, which turned into a PCT one just recently, in partnership with our tech transfer office, and have built new prototypes with our contract manufacturers now getting ready for animal testing, and potentially a collaborative relationship with an industry partner. For me, I was coming from a Stanford biodesign background where the model was dependent on seasoned medical engineering and business people working together in a totally flattened hierarchy and taking part in the training program to maximize success. But I wasn't sure that this was exactly translatable to my context at NYU. For example, within our own healthcare campus, we are very physically separated from the main NYU campus, as well as its engineering school located in Brooklyn. And so I realized that the most important thing was that the special sauce could exist in a model that was more achievable within our own internal world. As long as you had someone who had some innovation experience, a clinical domain expert, and then usually on the training or learner level, someone with some background in medtech or engineering who could execute. Jamie was a brilliant medical student at the time who had an engineering degree in undergrad and previous experience in medtech projects. So this trifecta was what was necessary for success for this particular project, and was the model for which we can think about a program within the bounds of an academic medical system alone. It was this inspiration that we piloted out the MedTech Pipeline program 2 years ago. It's a 1-year biodesign process with clinical thought leaders, as well as the innovation program as the mentors. We curate the specialties that every year, the fields that we ask the people to concentrate on, with a goal for the students and trainees and faculty to work through the 3 biodesign phases together. Now, since I'm a surgeon, I decided that it was totally reasonable to convince this model from a full-time Stanford biodesign fellowship, funded, this is your only job, to a structure where trainees would do their normal day jobs and pursue this program as an intensive extracurricular exercise with homework. So we're in the process of trying to change that a little bit. But on another level, we didn't want to hide the fact that this was meant to be an intensive and exciting program for only those who were motivated. So when we first put that call out, only internally to NYU, I figured that there wouldn't be too many people like Jamie. We'd have a few Fogartys, maybe, the ones who do spend until midnight tinkering in their garage. Maybe get a few applications, take a couple of people interested who had a previous life at Medtronic. Instead, we received nearly 30 applications in a month's time and simply couldn't find a way to say no to 9 of them. They were literally just too brilliant. So then we needed to rapidly scale up and find clinical fields and mentors with that appropriate innovation-minded phenotype, because there aren't too many of those either. And then it was on. We flew by the seat of our pants the following, that first year. We created our curricular network from scratch. We had partners providing incredible lectures and building blocks like IP, the regulatory environment, the reimbursement market access strategies. We culminated in a Shark Tank like pitch night where the teams presented their projects in front of some really unfriendly judges. And the winners received a seed of $25,000 in funding to continue development over the following year. They've since filed a patent application themselves and are working with our partners in an internal engineering institute at NYU called Tech for Health. And they are developing a device called the Kedge, which aims to secure intraluminal cannulas and sense changes in position before inadvertent dislodgement or problems. This was born out of their biodesign unmet clinical need regarding neonatal ECMO cannulation and the catastrophic effects of accidental decannulation. But those are obviously broadly applicable to many other kinds of tubes in tubes. They would definitely appreciate my not sharing more of their technology right now publicly, so I'll move on. But I am so proud of them and the fact that they were our very first graduated team from the official program. And so, of course, for our second year, we couldn't find a way to say no to 14 people. And luckily, we are now getting a little bit more known institutionally and had increasing faculty interest in joining our program. So the benefit of natural scaling has begun. So this year, we're working with HPB, vascular surgery, and neurosurgery and hopefully they will have some projects to share in 2 months. Speaking of scaling, our departmental faculty is fully bought in, and our institutional leadership has taken notice to see that it can scale beyond surgery to other fields. This is simply an image list of those who've actively participated or engaged with the MedTech pipeline just in the past 2 years. This does not include our other clinical departmental partnerships, which continue to grow as well. So winding down this talk, I remain very grateful to Dr. Montgomery, Bob, for his continued support and for allowing me the freedom to define and grow our innovation program in the way that I've envisioned and described. I'm also grateful to our core leadership team. I can't not mention some of these names. Ariana Akaya is our superstar program manager, and Mark Saddam, who's the executive vice president at NYU of Technology Opportunities and Ventures, incredible partner for us and has helped support our program in a number of ways. And then we continue to form this network and alliances which are critical to a venture like this. These are external related partners. I'm grateful and indebted to them for contributing to the education mission, as well as being partners for joint development projects. So lastly, so in summary, what can I conclude? I truly believe surgeons are a natural fit within the MedTech innovation system, and with a little bit of extra training, more of us can really make that mark. So I think we can support training in these types of pathways in an area that, in a way that fits within our current paradigm of surgical education. There are a common set of tools and concepts related to this that all new ventures have in common and are useful for all of us to learn a little bit more about. And lastly, a re-burgeoning culture, I think we have in innovation and entrepreneurship does not have to conflict with the mission of academic medicine or with ethical delivery of healthcare. I'd like to thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you today. I'm happy to take part in the discussion afterwards.
Self-moderate. Well, thank you so much for a very, very informative and frankly inspiring talk. I wish I heard that talk when I was a resident, to be perfectly honest. Fascinating journey, fascinating history of this and offering perspectives on why it can be so challenging. And, you know, I still can't get my head around the cost of surgical training. I think we're all going to need angel investors, whether we innovate or not. So we're going to be able to take some questions from the online, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions in the room. I see two excellent innovators right there. So I won't ask a stock question. We'll go right to the real people. There you go. I think the mic's just not on, just for the folks online. And
can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. So thank you for an unbelievable talk. One question I have is the tech transfer offices in hospitals. They have objectives that are, in line with what you're saying, but they often seem like a barrier to innovation. Can you speak on that and why is that? So I know that engineering schools, they seem to have much more liberal policies towards inventors. And it seems that tech transfer offices, that you feel like you can't really begin because the policies are so restrictive?
Thank you so much for that question. It's a very important one and probably can take up another hour of discussion. But the summary points that I think I can state is, number one, tech transfer offices usually serve the entirety of a university, not just the medical campus. There are some obviously medical specific universities out there. So they need to make the decisions on what to prioritize that they think is going to bring the greatest value according to the strengths of that university. Is it mostly from the health sciences sector? Is it mostly from the engineering sector, et cetera? That's compounded by the fact that most tech transfer offices are resource limited, very small in comparison to the amount of intellectual property that's generated by smart people at the university setting. So a large part of this is literally a bottleneck issue. The third is editorialization wise, some tech transfer offices are bad. They're just not, they don't have the right people and they don't know what they're doing. We have, to put it a better way, there are some tech transfer offices that have developed an excellent reputation because they do get it, but they also happen to be ones that are very large. Stanford's OTL, which is their version, is gigantic. And you can imagine why. There's so much IP coming from a university like that. Where I was at UCSF was, they would agree, it was historically bad. And then it got better because they hired more people and better people. And by better, when it comes to health sciences, you really need someone who knows health sciences. So people who had spent time in pharma, biotech, now in digital health and all sorts of things in order to understand what it is that you're inventing and to be good partners to help you prosecute that patent, with their expenses, et cetera. So again, maybe that was even longer than the answer than I anticipated because it's such a big topic. But I think those are some of the key issues.
There. Thanks for a great talk. That was amazing. In terms of, I have a lot of questions, but how did you leverage biodesign at NYU? I mean, you've attended biodesign, so you have some core knowledge and expertise, but is there a formal partnership? Did you raise funding, and do you have funding to run these programs? And how much do you rely on your own core competencies versus the relationship with Stanford at the present time?
That's a great question. So we didn't rely on any philanthropic funding. We are trying to get that. We are completely internally when I say internally subsidized, I would say institutionally subsidized, I guess. So at first it was a pet project for me. So my department was very kind to me. Once we started getting more traction within the institution more broadly, then it became a more institutional mission. So our tech transfer office is called Technology Opportunities and Ventures. Most technology transfer offices, by the way, they try to expand their missions to not just fulfill the filing the patent office side, but also being charged with a bucket of money to act almost in a venture capacity as well. So they decided that this was a good bet to fund internal projects. So they fund a lot of, they funded our Shark Tank. They fund part of a few salaries for those people who teach in our programs internally as faculty. As we grow, we have an institutional interest in scaling this program up. We are at the two models that we'd like to follow that Stanford does a lot really well is industry partnerships. So there are educational grants. We all know, those types of things that we get from conferences and meetings to support national society meetings, similar to those, but on a recurring yearly basis. And then philanthropic funding. A lot of the innovation programs wind up having some degree of philanthropy involved. Yeah.
Thank you.
Time for one more.
Test. Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Insoo, for such a great talk. I was really interested in when you were talking about promotion and tenure and incentivizing work in this area. At our university, we have different tracks for surgeons, surgeon investigators, surgeon scientist, surgeon educator, and part of the new thing is going to be surgeon entrepreneur, innovator. What are your thoughts around creating metrics of performance in an area like that? Like, how do you some of those metrics, but objectively, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because I think to juxtapose that with surgeon scientist or physician scientist paths, you're measured on how well you were able to score on some grant, how much in total grant funding you were able to produce, what are the impact of the publications that you've had that are very well known. I think there are probably some imperfect analogies and corollaries that one can make, right? The number of disclosures, IP disclosures that you have created, did that then lead to, it's probably more of a longitudinal thing. Did those disclosures then die? Like, do you just have a patent that you can look up on Google Patents? Or did that then translate to something that was licensed to a true commercialization opportunity, whether it was you who formed a startup or it was licensed out to a big strategic company that then started development on those things. Along those realms, IP, startup formation, amount of capital that was invested in one form or another, and then eventually, probably more of a dichotomous variable at first, like were patients affected by your work, and then how many? I think those things are roughly the metrics that one may want to follow, right? Outside of that, I'm sure there are more creative ways. Like, I'm just looking at you and thinking of all the incredible, surgical vision, AI, and like, how does one look at that and contextualize that? If you wind up partnering with an Intuitive or something, and that winds up affecting all of the robotic surgical procedures there are, then yeah, you should probably be promoted, in that track. Like, how much so, and how quickly, I don't really have a great answer, but I'm sure as we develop more examples, then people will have a better a way of uniformly comparing one versus the other, right? But I guarantee you'll be the top dog.
On that note. Fantastic. Well, I think we're just at time here this morning. I just really want to thank you for a phenomenal lecture. You've given us lots to think about, and really, really wonderful 2026 Palmer lecture. So thank you so much, and thanks for coming, everyone.